Hi everyone, it's John Brooks here. Just to let you know, we are going to be asking you a couple of questions at the start of this, just about your current processes. It's just so we can make sure we cover the questions and understand more about how you're working today with your budgets and forecasting in JD Edwards. So the first question we want to do is talk about how you do budgeting in JD Edwards. So what you'll see now is a voting button on your screen, where you can say, do you keep your budgets in JD Edwards? And you've got the options of yes, no, or I'd like to, but it's just too difficult. So if you could all now vote yes, no, or we would like to, that'd be great.
Okay, and now closing that poll and sharing the results.
Okay, so quite good. We've got 80% of people actually do hold a budget in JD Edwards. Just 10% that don't, and 10% that would like to. So it's good to hear that you're holding your budget in JD Edwards. The options to put it into JD Edwards at the moment are either through an Excel upload or creating journals. Both of these can be quite painful processes. They can be quite time consuming and error prone, depending on how many lines you have to put in and how often you do your budgeting and forecasting. Some people do annual budgeting, quarterly or even monthly budgeting and forecasting. This can become quite a long, laborious task. Question 2 I've got is how many of you use external systems? So do you use things like Cognos Planning or Hyperion or some other external system to JD Edwards that your data then goes into? And there's a no button if you don't use any external system. So if you could all vote now, that would be great. Okay, the votes are coming in, and here's the votes from the jury. Well, pretty even split between Cognos and Hyperion there, and only 27% of people don't take data into another system. So one of the things that we often get feedback about Insight budgeting and planning is it gives immediate results, and the issue with the external systems is you're taking data out of JD Edwards and you're putting it into the external system. But you typically can't do this until you've finished month end, you've cleaned up all the accounts, you've done your reconciliations, you've made sure the data's all correct. Then you do the upload to the external system. So it can take up to 5 days quite often before people actually can get an actuals versus budget report. So this is something that our customers tell us they want to try and improve on. They want to be able to see their actuals and their budgets in JD Edwards straight away or during the month, and not have to wait until day 5 of the month-end process to update the external system, and not be able to update it again for another month. And the comment we had from a customer was, it's a bit like trying to drive your car through the rearview mirror. You're always looking backwards at what had happened the previous month when you're halfway into the next month. The third question is around spreadsheets. So a lot of people will use spreadsheets as part of the Excel budgeting process. Here specifically, we want to know, do you use Excel to capture the data that's coming in from various people who have to contribute to the budget? And, well, that's fairly conclusive. 100% of you say yes, we use Excel to capture budgets. So it's a very common practice. JD Edwards is pretty bad at having a way of entering budgets at a contributor level. And so people take it into their own hands and start using spreadsheets. The problem is you start emailing out spreadsheets and then you get version 2 of the spreadsheet, and someone puts an error onto one spreadsheet and they copy it, and they accidentally delete a row or they add another column. And Excel's fly around, and someone has to have the poor job of collating all that information, bringing it back into one central location, verifying it, and trying to get it into JD Edwards. And you spend more time just messing around with data than you actually do analysing the budget for what it's telling us about the business and making adjustments. It's a very manual process, very error-prone process, and the worst part about it is you have to repeat it next month, and the month after that, and the month after that. So 100% of people on the webinar today, are collecting data through that Excel process. We think we've got a better way for you to do that. So let's talk about Insight Unlimited Budgeting. It's actually the only tool on the marketplace specifically built for JD Edwards. It's fully integrated into JD Edwards, so it unifies your JD Edwards system and your budgeting and forecasting processes. So you can do it all in one place. The Insight Unlimited budgeting tool comes as part of the suite. Many of you may have seen Insight Unlimited reporting, getting live real-time reports built by end users. Insight Unlimited Reconciler solve the problem of month-end reconciliations, things like goods received not vouchered, inventory cardex, APAR, etc. Making sure everything reconciles. Budgeting is what we're talking about today. And also the Insight Unlimited Quick Starts. So these are the different modules for everything from advanced cost accounting to advanced pricing and everything in between. So if we talk about the Insight Unlimited budgeting process, what we do is we create Insight forms to let you capture your data. These are forms that can be given to an end user, to a contributor, that gives them a very controlled way to capture their budgets and forecasts. And they can also put comments on there. That's really important. If today you're doing Excel data collection, and someone puts a comment onto a column, onto a filter, onto a particular cell of data, well, that comment is lost. There's no way that comment can get into JD Edwards. You lose it for review later on. You lose it for when you have to see data next year. So Insight gives you a simple way to input budgets, data, forecasts, and comments. You can then analyze this data in one system. No one has to do a collation exercise. The data is immediately available as soon as users start typing it in, before and after it's approved. The approval process works via workflow, so you can share the results, that you can share the data that was entered. You can have summarized reports with drill downs to variances, drill downs to detail in the actual budget data itself to say whether it's going to be approved or rejected. And once it is approved, you have the option of uploading it into JD Edwards, and this is a one-click upload, so it's much simpler than the inbuilt JD Edwards tools, much simpler than having to write journal entries. It's one-click upload into JD Edwards. You don't have to do it. A number of customers would actually choose to keep the data in Insight because that's where they do all the reporting from anyhow. But if you need it to go into JD Edwards, it's a one-click upload process. So all of this happens in one place in your JD Edwards system. You don't have to take data in, take data out, export it. It all stays on the Insight screens live within your JD Edwards system. So here's an example of an Insight budget screen. I've got a business unit here, business unit 302. I've actually got a P&L structure underneath. I've got a hierarchy. So I've got my revenues and my various accounts, and I've got my costs and various accounts. And here you can see I've got a mixture of both live JD Edwards data. So there's my January actuals from last year. The second column is my suggested uplift. And what we've done is we put a model into there to say revenues are going to go up 10%, direct costs 5%, overheads aren't going to increase at all. And then the actual budget contributor, the budget manager, they can enter in what their final budget is going to be. So they can enter in new totals or adjustments. That's up to you. And you can see these yellow columns go across the screen. So I've got January's budget contribution, February's, March, April, etc. So I can enter budgets for whole years and then later spread them, or I can enter individual months. The nice thing about this Insight capture screen is you can put variances and feedback live onto the screen to the user. So if somebody enters an amount that's outside the control variance you want, you can turn it yellow as a warning or maybe red as stop. So you can't ever have someone enter a budget that's so far outside the boundaries you've given them that they say, I didn't realise that number was wrong. It was right in front of them at the time they entered it onto the screen. So you can actually clean up and speed up the budget data collection process and maybe have less cycles, maybe less going backwards and forwards to the end user to collect and revise the data because it's right first time. So the budgeting process is controlled. You have various activities. The activity contains cycles. So for instance, I might have a forecasting activity with 12 cycles, one for each month. You define your participants. This is who approves data, who manages the process, who's entering the budget data. You control who can do each step. Workflow controls the whole process, letting people know when it's budget time, when they have to complete their budgets by, when something's ready for approval, if it's ready for upload. You'll be told all of these things by email automatically. And lastly, we have something called scope. Scope lets you control what they enter budget information for. Now, Insight naturally uses JD Edwards security already. This is an extra layer of control on top of security. So you might have one person in a business unit authorised to put in the revenue accounts, and a different person who's in charge of putting in the costs. Scope would let you make sure they only enter budget data for their relevant areas. Modelling. This is quite a key feature. It's one of the real benefits of using Insight to collect your data. What we realise is a lot of data in the budgeting process can be modelled. You might enter some drivers, for instance. It might be the amount of revenue you're going to get, or the number of units of a product you're going to be manufacturing. And once you've entered this data, and let's say we just enter some revenue figures at the top of this grid, so we're entering into the yellow lines, we'll actually press the Apply Model button. That will send those key drivers off into a model, and a very flexible model that you can control, have all kinds of calculations, spreading, logic in there. And once the model is processed, it will actually send the results back to populate different accounts within the grid. And John Luvar is going to show you an example, a nice example of modelling working in just in a few minutes when we get into live software. So we're talking about capturing data, we're talking about modelling data, but it's not just about money. It's not just about pounds, dollars, euros and yen. It could be around capturing other information, KPI type information like energy use, square footage or square meterage, overtime, full-time equivalents, headcount, safety incidents, production volumes. All of these can be captured and then used in calculations live in JD Edwards. So if you've got things like production volumes and headcount, I can do things like contribution by employee, or cost per ton or revenue per ton. I can do all of those kind of calculations. Here's an example from job costing. This is in job costing where somebody wants to be able to enter the percentage complete in a particular project or different step of a project. So what I can see here is I've got an Insight screen showing me for this project 5,000. What's my estimated amount, my committed amounts, what stage complete am I? So I can see this project is 23% complete, and I can see we were originally estimating it to be costing 3.9 million. We actually think we're going to come under that at 3.05 million. So we can actually see the results of that budgeting forecasting now in job costing using percent complete. So it's not all about the numbers. This can be used for a lot more than that. So now it's time to hand over to John Luvar, who's actually going to take us through actually using Insight budgeting and forecasting.
Perfect. Well said, John. Okay, just a couple of technical questions for you. Can you see my screen there, Mr. Brooks?
Yes, yep, you're live.
And you hear me good, yeah?
Yep.
All right. Okay, so what I want to start with is just remembering this particular chart that John Brooks mentioned earlier, because I'm going to kind of walk through this particular circle diagram, and we'll come back to it in a second here. But to start off my presentation, I really wanted to boast a little bit about what Insight looks like out of the box, because I think that's one of our things that we need to brag more about. This is what you're going to see first is what Insight looks like after a 1-hour installation, okay? And to do this, I'm going to show you from the perspective of a console user, which is somebody who basically has reports written for them, but they're able to interact with those reports. And what I'm showing you is really right out of the box using the general ledger module found in Insight and the balance template. And so as an end user, I can come in here and you can see in Insight, as a console user, I have 3 ribbons up at the top. The one we're going to talk about today is budgeting. But before I get to that, I just want to show you how I can interact with any report. This is the report right out of the box. So if I wanted to select a range of business units, I can come up to the filters and I can just put that in. Maybe if I wanted to look at just my income statement accounts, I could put the greater than object account 5,000 qualifier into that filter. And because we're so tightly integrated with JD Edwards, I have immediate access to all the category codes that I utilize today for financial reporting right at my fingertips. A good example of that I always use during demonstrations is just to turn on category code number 4. and then continue on with my filters. You'll see if I come down here to the bottom, in my period filters, I've got a current and cumulative, which is just extracting the real-time period that's in JD Edwards. But if I wanted to, I can just come in here and put in my own period or ranges of periods if I like, and I can change my years. I'll point out ledgers because it's going to be important when we talk about budgeting, but for now I'm just going to pull JD Edward ledger types AA and BA, and I'll include some variance calculations in here as well just to make it fun. Okay, now I have a QBE line, so I'm going to show you how that works, but first this is what the data looks like kind of in real time. Again, after 1 hour installation, this is how you can interact with your data. If I wanted it to come up here and I can filter on branch office, I can do that. And finally, if I want to look at any of these variances and understand a little bit more about why my balances are the way they are, I can use Insight's linking functionality to take me down to the transactional level and just show me all of the individual line items. Just by double-clicking, I can go to other reports. And in this example, I'm going down to the transactional level. Okay, so that's what you get out of the box. Now I'm going to take that and build on it with a real-world scenario around the topic at hand, which is budgeting. So to talk about budgeting, I'm going to put forward a scenario that is typical, at least it's one that I saw when I was working in the field. Okay, so imagine that we're at the end of the first quarter of 2013, and I'm going to show to you how a typical console user named Debbie Bellis would interact with her process at the end of a quarter to update their rest of year forecast, I call it. To do that, I'm going to be in a report that's built off of that balance template that I just showed you. And you can see that the filters have been changed to help Debbie understand what she needs to interact with. You'll see that Debbie is responsible for 4 business units. There's a lean P&L filter up here, which is our hierarchy functionality. Again, that's very unique to Insight. It's a tool that's intended for end users to use to be able to build their own financial statements. You can see the financial statement in my margin here going down on the left. It's a typical income statement broken out by business unit. You can see that I've got like direct revenue and all the accounts that roll into that, and costs, calculations for contribution margin, and row-based calculations for percentages, which is also difficult for other tools to do, especially without IT assistance. So that's kind of hierarchy functionality. We could spend all day on it. But again, the report is intended for Debbie to come into every quarter at the end of the month and select what quarter forecast she wants to update. So she'll look at results for the end of a particular quarter. This report is designed to be reused year over year, so you'll see that that's built into the report as well. And then I want to talk a little bit about this forecast entry, because this is really highlighting Insight's unique characteristic found in Insight budgeting that allows end users to really create ledger types that are not in JD Edwards. These ledgers are where Insight holds any data that is submitted for budgets or forecasts, and they act just like JD Edwards ledger types. So your AA or your BA will have an Insight ledger that looks very much like a JD Edwards ledger. The only difference is that that ledger information is stored outside of JD Edwards, but the end user doesn't feel that. You know, we can pull JD Edwards ledger information and Insight ledger information at the same time in one report. And you'll see that whenever cells turn yellow and I key in an amount, that's an Insight ledger. So let's go through the process. In the report down below, again, I'm looking at a variety of business units, and I'm looking at the first column, my March year-to-date actual information, and I'm comparing it to my March year-to-date budget information. So there I can kind of see how I'm performing as was expected when I originally put forth the BA or the original budget. Now, in gray, you'll see a full year original budget amount. That's the period 12 or December expected budget. And I'm going to compare that column to my actual spent year-to-date to calculate a remaining budget. Now, you notice I'm using an Insight calculation that rounds, so it's very similar to a spreadsheet, except we're not relying on a spreadsheet to do this. We're using the Insight built-in functionality to round this calculation and give me a good estimate of my rest of year what I expect to spend. So as a starting point, you'll see that that column goes all the way down across all of my business units. And what I'm going to do is just go into enter budget mode. And I'm going to select that column of data, and I'm going to paste it right into my rest of year planning adjustment. Okay, that's going to give me a good starting point of basically using the same assumptions that I had when I did my original budget, but taking into consideration anything that's changed in the economic climate or any other environmental conditions. So a good example of this is maybe in my business unit, originally I had forecasted or budgeted $289,000 of product fee revenues. For whatever reason, I know that those items or that product is discontinued. So I can put in a 0 there, and then I can type into the comment column, discontinued operations, okay? And then next I might want to go down to manufacturing temp labor, and I know that union contract negotiations have failed, so I'm going to bump up my temp labor up, a few $100,000 and say union contract negotiations failed. All right, and then I'll scroll down and maybe to another business unit I'll just kind of make a change to, I don't know, maintenance, and I'll say something like maintenance contract with Acme canceled. And so that would have a negative impact. I'm going to just make this $5 million. Okay, so I would go through all of my new information and I would update my rest of year forecast. Once I'm done with that process, I come out of enter budget mode and I save that data. I say yes to this question. It becomes immediately available for everyone to view in Insight. Okay, so now the next step is how do I get this data that's kind of in a lump number and spread it across all my months? So I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to double click and it's going to open up another report that I use to spread this rest of year forecast amount. And when I run it, you'll notice that my rest of year planning adjustment is pulled into this gray column here. All of the periods going across are blank. And I just want to automatically populate each month's data. To do that, I'm going to go back into enter budget mode. And I'm going to use the feature called apply model to basically spread that rest of year amount into each month. And right now it's doing that. It's doing all the calculations. You'll see it come back. We can come out of this budget mode and we'll save that data. And now almost instantly our rest of year budget has been populated into each month. So as I progress with my budget to actual comparison month by month, I'll be able to have this information and leave a trail behind of new assumptions and comparisons to actuals. Just to quickly highlight, if I wanted to change anything as far as individual months, I can go back into enter budget and I can override, maybe just zero this out and make this, I don't know, 400,000, 4 million, and make this 15,000 or 50. Okay, and when I come out, I built in a feature so that in the far right column where it says forecast variance, this report can be used to identify rows that have been overridden from this rest of year planning adjustment. So it very quickly highlights for anyone in the organization to see where we're having changes in opinions about what's going to happen in the future. And so I like to use that column to highlight that. All right, now just really quick, after we're done with the forecast, we want to broadcast to everyone that yes, we're truly done. We're not going to make any more changes. So to do that, I'm going to use budgeting's function for finalization. So I'm going to click that button, and as an end user, a notification is going to go off telling my approver, the person responsible for accepting or rejecting my submissions, that the budgets are done. And so that person has just received notification that the budget's been finalized. Now, if I'm Debbie and I try to go in and change another number, for example, I just select enter budget, you'll notice that Insight locks it down. So there are built-in controls into our workflow that basically lock down a budget whenever you kind of break through certain hurdles, and it prevents a lot of those issues that evolve around spreadsheet budgeting. It's very easy to overwrite submitted amounts in a spreadsheet but here is very difficult. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to jump over to the reporting user. You can see that I'm a reporting user because I've got a lot more functionality at the top. But I'm in the same report. But in this case, instead of loading the monthly information, I'm just going to call it out because it's already been submitted by Debbie. And instead of looking at it in a trial balance, I'm going to look at it in a hierarchy. So I'm just going to turn that on, and I'm going to analyze what Debbie submitted in a hierarchy fashion. Okay, so I can see that same income statement going down for each business unit. Now, once I come out of my review process, I want to know where everyone else stands in the budget, so I'm going to use cycle status, and I'm going to look at everything that's been submitted in this process. The cycle status button is a window that any user can click on to see where everyone's at in the budget process, and you can see we've got all of our names here. Close this up. This is the approver level. If I expand the approver, I can see who they're responsible for approving. I can see Paul Ingram here, and I can see Debbie, and I can see the form that was just finalized. If I like what I see, I can approve it. If I don't, I can reject it, push it back down to Debbie to redo the whole process. I'm going to say I like it. As soon as I do that, you'll see that all the forms that are sitting in approved status, if I just click on them, I can upload them directly to JD Edwards just with this one click. So once I upload it to JD Edwards, we can basically say that our rest of your forecast is done, and we can go off and do our regular day jobs. And so this process is what we'll use every quarter. And you can see, as easy as it is, you could potentially do it every month, which we're starting to see some more momentum around continuous forecasting, which is a future webinar to be released here. We'll kind of show you how you can do that using Insight. But just to revisit what I just did, I showed you very quickly how easy it is to input into an Insight ledger, key directly into Insight, not a spreadsheet. Take that information and spread it into your monthly buckets, and then once you're done with that process, you finalize it, lock it down, it pushes it to the approver layer where they can review it, look at it in any fashion, whether it's a consolidation or an income statement. And if they like it, they can approve it. If they don't, they reject it. But once everything is done, then you can just upload it very quickly back into JD Edwards with a single click. All right, so I'm going to pass it back to John Brooks now. I know he's got one more question.
Yeah, thank you for that, John. So, I mean, what John just showed us would actually have taken a lot longer if we're sending out any kind of spreadsheets. People have to wait for their email to arrive with a spreadsheet on, get round to opening it, and you don't even have visibility of those numbers until they can be bothered to send the spreadsheet back and someone's collated them. So having that instant visibility will massively reduce how long your budgeting cycles take. We've got customers reporting budgeting cycles taking up to 70% less time, which really enables you to do budgeting more frequently and less time collecting data, more time analyzing data. There's a lot less hassle, there's fewer errors. You know all the account numbers are correct because they're on a validated screen. There's no opportunity for someone to add an extra line or column to Excel that shouldn't really exist. You can budget it much more frequently. Customers who now be able to move to this monthly budgeting and forecasting cycle get a much better handle on their business. Insight goes live. Insight reporting, as John said, can install an hour. You can typically go live on Insight budgeting in between 3 and 10 days. It's that quick. It understands how JD Edwards works. It's very intuitive. It's so tightly integrated into JD Edwards. It knows about things like your security, your accounting periods, your users, your business units, your structures. So that's how you can go live so quickly. And it is the only tool on the marketplace purpose-built for JD Edwards budgeting. It completely unifies your JD Edwards system, your budget process. As John was showing there, the data you're capturing on the screen is right next to live JD Edwards data. So you've got that mixture of budgeting data and JD Edwards data on the same screen, and you can see a variance in between it before and after approval. So we've been telling you about Insight software. Insight is actually already being used by over 750 JD Edwards customers worldwide. So it's a very widespread tool around all countries of the world. And we had one last question for you. And the question is, how long does your budget process currently take? This is the last one. So if it takes less than 1 month, you're actually in the normally the minority group, but is it 1 to 3 months or more than 3 months? Okay, so there we have. So we've got about 70% of people take between 1 and 3 months to a budget cycle. That's not uncommon. What we're asking you is, what would it do to your organisation if you could move yourself? If you take more than 3 months now, if you could go to the 1 to 3 month category, and if you're in the 1 to 3 month category now, how important would it be for you to get into the takes less than 1 month? How much time would that free up in budgeting and planning? How much time would that free up in finance and in the business as well from the contributors of the data? So think about budgeting time when everyone goes, oh no, it's budgeting time again. What would happen if you could reduce that by 70%? So if you want to learn some more, as John mentioned, we do have a webinar coming soon around continuous budgeting. It's quite a hot topic. People want to do a rolling 12 or rolling 18 or rolling 24-month forecast. So continuous budgeting, we'll be contacting you about that in the near future. Next month in London, in our Insight offices in London, we'll actually be running a hands-on workshop. So we'll have one of our conference rooms. We'll have it laid out with laptops, all with the latest version of Insight loaded, for people to come along and actually try using Insight budgeting. And what we'll do is we'll actually go through a whole cycle. So we'll set up a form. We'll choose what data we're going to capture. We'll set up the ledgers, the Insight ledgers appropriately. We'll capture some data. We'll have some approval and rejection, and then an upload to JD Edwards. So you'll see a whole process in one day. So please let us know if that's something that interests you. That's a free of charge event. It's just to get ready for the people who will be starting their budget cycles maybe after the summer holidays. We wanted to get them thinking in July about a better way to do this. And finally, we've got a special web page just for budgeting. So you can go to insightsoftware.com/budgeting. And when you go to that page, you'll see all kinds of documentation, downloads. You can watch a little video on the process. And there's a lot of information there for you to look at. So that's insightsoftware.com/budgeting to see that information. And if you'd like to contact either John Luvar or myself, we welcome questions and feedback. Obviously you can ask questions now using GoToMeeting on the side panel. But if you think of a question later, you can jot down our email addresses. It's john.luvar and john.brooks both at insightsoftware.com. So, Amy, do you have any questions?
We do, John. We've had a couple that have come in. As John said, if you have got a question, then feel free to enter it into the question panel on the right-hand side of your screen. So, first question is, do you have to upload into JDE?
You don't have to. I mean, if you're taking data from JD Edwards into another system, maybe for some global system, then you may choose to upload it. But you absolutely don't have to. So, and you might choose, for instance, to put in your budget into JD Edwards, but not the monthly forecasts. So those ledgers could stay in Insight and do your reporting from there. Same with KPIs. If you're capturing non-financial data, then you may choose to leave that just an Insight rather than upload it to JD Edwards. So it is an optional step.
Okay, and next question. How long is a typical project?
It's 1 to 2 weeks. I mean, that's quite typical to actually go on site and start working with customers' live data, so their business units, their P&L structures, work out who's involved in the process. So 1 to 2 weeks we typical. That's a normal Insight budgeting project. So we've got a question here about custom production planning in Insight. So if the question's around, if you want to put in there how you're going to be, what kind of production volumes you're going to be planning, you could do that by business unit, by subledger. So it'll be stored in the balances file, and that means you'll have your actual amounts will come through. So, for instance, you've got your AU ledger and your BU ledger for storing units and production volumes. We can update those. And you can also create your own ledgers as well, using the Insight ledgers in budgeting. So you'll be able to store that data and then use that for fairly typical reports people are running, like what were my volumes against the plan, my production volumes against the actual original production plan, what were my revenues for those volumes, so what was my actual profit or contribution by sales volume or by production volume.
Okay, another question that's come in. How does the modelling work? Does it use spreadsheets?
It does actually use a spreadsheet behind the scenes. So what we've done is the person who controls your budgeting process is able to build a model using a spreadsheet, but that model's centrally controlled. The end users never see it. When John, if we just make John the presenter again,
Sure.
and when John went to the button that said Apply Model, John, if you can get ready to just show that screen. What happens is it's sending data from the Insight grid to the Excel model that's saved into the object repository database. So it's one centrally controlled model. It can use a whole bunch of logic. So we've got the Apply Model button there up in the toolbar, and it is sending data from Insight into the Excel, and then what it's doing is the Excel will process and it will send data back to update a whole bunch of other cells with the calculations that you've put into the Excel. So you've got tremendous amount of power there, because that Excel could hold additional data in the model. It could do averages, sums, splits, spreads, allocations, all of those kind of things. It's a way of integrating one single Excel into your model in a very controlled way. You're not emailing that out. Users can't see it. It's centrally controlled. We've actually turned Excel into a mini database, the way we tag the data, so you can use wildcards, very flexible. But it's a nice secure way to embed the power of Excel into your process.
Okay, a couple more questions that have come in. I know that we're short for time now. Can you consolidate all the data?
Yes. So one of the key features of Insight is consolidating or aggregating data. So we'll basically aggregate data by the columns on your screen. So if you add or remove a column, you will see summarized or aggregated data immediately. So for instance, it would be quite simple to see just what is the entire forecast at a business unit level. Take out object account, you see the net effect on business unit just by having business unit as the only column. And that's a standard part of the Insight reporting. John, can you click on the balances screen for a second?
The balances tab?
Yep, you've got the balances all open at the bottom. So what John's going to do, if on this screen, John, if you just put the business unit back to an asterisk in the filter.
You're breaking up, John. I can't tell. What did you say? Take the business unit what?
Just make that an asterisk.
Okay.
And so if you run that report now, this could be a report with JD Edwards data, forecast data, anything I want to have in there. And John, you've still got branch code equals 500. Just take that away. So if we want to aggregate the data, actually, John, if you can go to a power user screen.
Yes.
Sorry.
That's okay. Now I know where you're
Okay.
heading. So I'll make the business unit a wildcard here. We're looking at an income statement and the ledger, and all I need to do is basically, here you're looking at it wide open, retrieving full amount of data, and it's going to break it out by business unit, that hierarchy. But if we remove the business unit column using the column sorting and grouping button, Insight will automatically aggregate all of the data and show it in totality. So here you're kind of looking at our business unit.
So what we just did there, we actually went from about 7,800 rows on John's grid down to about 800. So because before we saw a full set of accounts for each business unit, now we're just seeing one line per account. So it's aggregated together, all the business units. So I can see a total for product A revenues, one total for product B revenues across all of my different business units. So very simple to aggregate data. Just take a column away and automatic aggregation.
That's great. Lovely. I think we're just about out of time now, actually. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining the call today. And, of course, thank you to our presenters, John and John. Hope to speak to you again very soon. Enjoy the rest of your days. Bye.
Thank you.